This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof Wolff question from our Patreon community. This question comes from Adam F. in Glasgow, Scotland. And Adam's question basically is the current crisis of capitalism, the global crisis that hit the United States in February, hit other parts of the world a bit sooner, and is now roaring into the second and possibly still the first worst crisis of the capitalist system. And Adam wonders whether, as in past crises, capitalism will go through the contraction, massive suffering of unemployment, collapsed businesses, broken public finances, and so on, until the wages are so low and the workers are so desperate and the profits that can be gained finally because of low wages and cheap equipment will induce capitalists to reinvest, so that we have the very typical pattern that the capitalist system recovers with a robust investment boom what was earlier a robust investment collapse when the rate of profit led businesses to cut back, leading other businesses to cut back in the usual up and down instability that has dogged capitalism from its beginning. So let me answer very simply. Yes, capitalism has proven resilient in the sense that it has been able to generate upswings after its downswings. Let's not forget, however, two things. One, because it worked that way in the past is no guarantee that it will continue to do so. And number two, the social costs in ruined lives, broken marriages, lost output, unemployment, and all the rest are staggering. The economic instability of capitalism makes a joke out of its claims to be efficient. That isn't efficient. Having a crash every 4 to 7 years, which is what capitalism does, in which millions of people are thrown out of work for weeks or months or years, does such a damage to the output relative to the inputs that claiming capitalism is efficient requires a level of self-deluded blindness that is staggering. But having said all of that, what do I think about it this time? Well, I hate to do this, but I've got to be honest with you. This is a terrible economic crash. It's terrible for several reasons. Number one, it follows an unusually long upturn. The last crash was in 2008 and 9. Since the normal average is 4 to 7 years, by waiting until 2020, we basically had 10 to 11 years of upswing, and usually when the upswing lasts longer than the average, well, then the downswing can be bitter, cut deep, and last long. So that's not a good sign, number one. Number two, it really is global. At this point in the world, the only country that is economically growing and thereby helping the world economy get out of how desperate things are is the People's Republic of China. I'll put aside the implications of what I just said. But that's not enough. However big and powerful the Chinese economy is, it's not big and powerful enough to offset the downturns everywhere else. And that's a problem. And the third is the coincidence. You might call it capitalism's worst nightmare, when an economic downturn coincides with a non-economic crisis. Could be a war, could be a drought or a famine or a tsunami. In this case, it's a viral pandemic, COVID-19, that makes everything harder, harsher, worse. Capitalism's worst nightmare is that the instability, the crash every 4 to 7 years, which it has tried for centuries to overcome, to stop, without success, could happen together with a crisis. And the catastrophe this time is only made worse when you recognize that capitalism could have and should have prepared for yet another economic crash. It didn't. It could have and should have prepared for yet another dangerous virus. It didn't. It's a system that is already, in many ways, exhausted, dysfunctional. Does that mean it won't be resilient again? No. But I think the odds are changing. Capitalism has had its time. It is exhausted. It is serving a smaller and smaller of obscenely wealthy people at the expense of a growing majority whose sense of being exploited and abused is getting worse by the hour under the twin nightmare of an economic capitalist crash and the pandemic. Things do not look good for this crisis and this capitalism at this moment. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.